Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're doing something a little bit different.
Yeah.
We're looking closely at a reflection on therapy document one of you actually shared with us.
Yeah, it was really quite layered, wasn't it?
It really was so thoughtful. We just knew we had to dedicate this session to really digging into it.
Exactly. And just to be clear, this isn't about knocking therapy. It obviously helps a huge number of people.
Right.
But it's more about exploring the complexities this reflection brought up. Like, when is therapy maybe being used beyond its main purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And what does its growing popularity tell us about, wider cultural shifts?
That's the goal. We want to explore these ideas with you, try to get a clearer picture of therapy's role today, maybe think about its limitations too, and even touch on some alternative ways to well-being that your reflection mentioned. We'll cover quite a bit. How culture sees mental health, the language we use.
Yeah, the whole business side of it too. Friendships versus therapy, self-reliance.
Cultural viewpoints, definitely, and sort of how to find a balanced path forward. Okay, let's unpack this.
Okay, so maybe starting with therapy as a sort of
Yeah.
cultural snapshot.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it, how differently we see it now compared to, say, our grandparents' generation.
Totally different.
The reflection points out, for people who faced really big hardships, just getting through the day often meant pushing feelings down.
Yeah, just surviving.
Right. So therapy might have seemed like a luxury, or maybe even a sign you weren't coping, especially with certain ideas about stoicism or strength.
Yeah, you just had to sort of shoulder it and keep going. But
Yeah.
now, especially in the West, it feels like a complete flip.
Really does.
Expressing feelings, understanding yourself, that's often framed as a good thing, like personal growth. Going to therapy can be seen as proactive.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a sign of self-awareness for many.
But the reflection asks this really interesting question. Has this focus on the individual, the sort of expressive individualism, maybe got a bit too far? Are we so focused inward that we're maybe losing touch with community, with shared responsibility?
And that brings up this key idea, about our social fabric potentially changing. Could the rise in therapy be both a good thing we're taking care of ourselves and a sign that maybe those traditional supports, like family or close communities, aren't quite as strong as they once were?
That's a fascinating tension.
Are we looking inward partly because the outward support just isn't there in the same way?
Which ties perfectly into the next thing, the language we use. Your reflection really zeroed in on this concern about language inflation.
Yes.
How clinical terms are just popping up everywhere in daily chat. We've all heard it, right? A bad day is trauma. An annoying ex is a narcissist.
Right. And triggered being used for minor annoyances. And then you've got therapy TikTok,
Oh, yeah.
which, look, it can raise awareness, which is good in some ways, but it also seems to fuel a lot of maybe casual self-diagnosis.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Like, on one hand, more awareness means maybe people get help sooner for real issues. That's crucial.
Absolutely vital.
But on the other hand, you risk what the reflection called identity over-pathologization, people defining themselves by these labels.
Yeah. Does it make it harder then for people with diagnosed conditions to have their struggles taken seriously when the terms are used so broadly?
It feels like we grab these labels sometimes just to explain normal life ups and downs. But the reflection had a really good counterpoint here, too. Could this wider use of terms actually point to a deeper need? Like maybe people are using this language, even if loosely, because they're trying to name real feelings that they feel aren't being heard or validated otherwise.
That's a really interesting angle. A search for language to express genuine emotional pain or confusion.
Yeah.
And if we connect that bigger picture, this language shift is happening while the whole business of mental health is booming.
Right. Therapy is an industry. There's money involved.
Definitely. And the reflection points out a potential, tension there. Therapists need clients. Could that, even unintentionally, sometimes discourage shorter, solution-focused therapy? Maybe foster a bit of ongoing need.
And it specifically called out some therapy apps, didn't it? Concerns about high volume, maybe less personal connection, potentially missing what's really needed for deep change.
Yeah, that quick fix models versus deeper work.
Plus, insurance often pushes towards that too, right? favoring meds or short-term therapy blocks over, say, long-term exploration of something like an existential crisis.
Yeah.
That example really stuck with me.
It's a powerful example of system limitations.
Yeah.
But the reflection was fair, I thought. It
Hmm.
stressed that many, many therapists are doing amazing work within these constraints.
Sure.
So maybe the issue isn't so much individual therapists, but the structure of the system itself.
That makes sense. So if some people are turning to therapy partly because those social connections feel weaker, it does make you wonder, are we kind of swapping therapy for friendship sometimes?
That's a core question the reflection raises. Is therapy filling a gap left by maybe fewer, trusting, emotionally deep relationships?
It gave examples like young adults mainly connecting online, or maybe parents feeling too overloaded to lean on partners, or, men who were maybe taught not to show emotion.
Yeah, those are very real scenarios.
Hmm.
And therapy does offer that dedicated space, doesn't it? Clear boundaries, no worry about burdening someone.
Right. It's different from the give and take of friendship.
But the reflection brought up this really nice idea of a mental health ecosystem.
I like that.
Yeah, this whole web of support, our own coping skills, our relationships, and professional help. Ideally, different needs get met in different ways. Some things maybe are best worked through in community, some on our own, some with a
It
therapist.
shouldn't be all or nothing.
Exactly. But the question lingers. If we always go to a professional for emotional processing, do we maybe lose some capacity to navigate that stuff within our friendships or families?
That's a tough one. And it leads right into this idea of self-reliance versus needing that professional help.
Right. The reflection reminds us people have always found ways to cope and grow, right? Self-reflection, mindfulness, talking to mentors, self-help groups.
Like stoic journaling or AA, things like that.
Yeah, those kinds of practices. But, and this is a big but, the reflection also says doing that effectively often requires a baseline,
What do you mean?
like emotional awareness, enough time and space, maybe a supportive environment, just general stability.
Yeah.
Someone deep in trauma or addiction or facing serious abuse, they might not be able to just DIY their healing,
Absolutely not. That seems obvious.
So it raises that ethical question. Where's the line between encouraging self-responsibility and acknowledging when people genuinely need professional support, maybe because of huge systemic barriers or personal history?
Yeah, that's critical. Now, shifting slightly, the reflection brought up something interesting about therapy almost becoming, part of a lifestyle, or how people present themselves.
The performative aspect.
Yeah, you see it online, right? The constant "my therapist said" posts, or sometimes trauma becoming, content.
It's tricky because there's that potential for performance, sure, but also for some people, especially maybe from marginalized groups, online might be the only place they feel safe expressing certain things.
That's a very fair point.
So the reflection kind of asks, are we sometimes confusing just being visible online, sharing the struggle, with actually doing the work of healing and resolving things in our actual lives?
Visibility versus resolution.
Yeah.
That's a good distinction. So putting all these pieces together, the reflection seems to argue for a more balanced path.
Yeah, exactly. Not anti-therapy, not pro-therapy in all cases, but seeing it as one really valuable tool in a bigger toolbox for well-being.
A layered approach.
Right. Which means, yes, improving the mental health care system,
Yep.
access, cost, making it culturally sensitive, that's huge.
Definitely.
But also strengthening our communities, like really prioritizing connection and listening. And crucially, developing our own personal habits, self-reflection, better communication, more self-awareness.
I loved the analogy it used. Therapy is like a compass. It can point north, but it can't walk the path for you.
It's perfect, isn't it? Really captures that sense of agency needed.
It really makes you stop and think. This whole discussion, as the reflection points out, it isn't just about therapy itself. It says so much about how we as a society are coping, how we connect, how we're growing or maybe struggling to grow in a world that feels, kind of fragmented sometimes.
Yeah, you see these paradoxes everywhere, don't you? Like, we're more connected digitally, but maybe feel lonelier. More aware of mental health issues, but maybe understanding your own emotions less deeply. More words to describe things, but maybe less real communication happening.
It feels like therapy has sort of emerged in response to those tensions.
I think so. It seems to highlight this widespread feeling of maybe not being truly heard, or a kind of chronic loneliness for some people, and just this deep craving for safe places to be vulnerable.
Therapy became that container for many.
Exactly. But the big insight from the reflection, I think, is that we also need to build those containers within ourselves and between each other in our relationships. Healing can't just be outsourced. It needs active participation, individually and together.
So, okay, the practical side. How can we actually use these insights? The reflection had some really concrete steps.
It did. First off, this idea of rebuilding the commons,
What does that mean in practice?
like making a real effort to have deeper conversations with people we trust, showing up consistently, asking better questions, beyond how are you? Maybe what's been weighing on you lately, or what are you learning about yourself?
And just holding space, right? Not jumping in to fix everything.
Exactly. That line, we heal in the presence of patient people, really struck me. Just being present.
Me too.
Okay, what else? Another big one was normalizing a wider range of emotions without pathologizing them instantly.
Allowing for sadness without calling it depression.
Right. Or anger without it being toxic, or struggle without feeling broken. Just letting feelings be feelings. And maybe modeling that ourselves by naming our own emotions plainly, without shame or drama.
That takes practice. And then there's listening. Really listening.
Crucial. The reflection stressed listening to understand, not just to reply. Pausing. Reflecting back what you heard. Being actually present in the conversation. It sounds simple, but it's hard work.
Yeah, it really is.
And maybe the most empowering idea was treating ourselves like someone we're responsible for helping.
Like being our own therapist in a way.
Sort of. Making time for actual self-reflection, journaling, walks, voice notes, whatever works. Asking ourselves tough, honest questions. What am I avoiding? What do I really need? Challenging our own stories.
And that includes boundaries, right? And telling ourselves the truth.
Absolutely. That is self-care. Not just bubble baths, but the hard stuff too.
Okay, and finally, it mentioned discerning between real distress needing professional help versus other needs.
Yeah, telling the difference between a signal and noise, basically. Is this something that needs a therapist? Or could it be met differently, maybe through rest or connection or just being heard by a friend? Learning that discernment helps us use all resources better.
So the big takeaway seems to be the fact that therapy is so central tells us a lot about our unmet needs. For belonging, for emotional skills, for deeper ways to care for ourselves and each other.
Exactly. That's the so what. The limits of therapy highlight these deeper needs.
But the reflection isn't just critical, it offers a map, right? A way to start building those safer spaces, using therapy as a stepping stone maybe, showing up differently in our relationships and seeing that healing happens everywhere, not just in an office.
Yeah, it's ultimately constructive. And maybe the most provocative thought to leave people with is this. The future of mental well-being isn't just about more therapists.
Right.
It's also about each of us learning to be the kind of person who helps others feel less alone. How might you, the listener, apply some of this in your own life, in your own relationships? Something to really mull over.